We're drawing to the end, drawing to the close of this season, so to speak, or this series, I should say, of what is Judaism, because we're already at the tail end of the 19th century, and today we're going to run through the 20th century, essentially. So it'll be pretty much up to the present, and I'll only probably have one more show that's kind of explicitly in this particular series, what is Judaism, but I have lots more to talk about, so don't worry. And you may have been able to tell from the previous shows that I'm not really anti-Semitic, that actually a lot of my motivation is out of a tremendous love for true Judaism, of course, especially for the truest Judaism, which is the Catholic Church, but also for the Jewish spirit when it's really properly expressed as love for God. And therefore, my heart goes out a lot to, for instance, the Hasidic Jews, the very Orthodox Jews, who are still trying so hard to express the historical and traditional Jewish hunger for God and love for God, even though they don't have the privilege of knowing Jesus and having the sacraments of the Catholic Church. However, as you could tell when we got into the Enlightenment, Judaism has, obviously took a wrong path 2,000 years ago when it rejected Jesus, but it took another wrong path, let's say, after the Enlightenment, when it became less theological, less God-oriented, critical of traditional faith, and turned itself into a lot of things that weren't really the traditional Jewish love for God. So all of that is by way of a long-winded introduction to say I'm not really anti-Semitic. This show is probably going to be the most hostile to Jewish figures so far. Jewish figures, people who call themselves Jews in any case and are ethnically Jews, but who are not very faithful to God, even in a Jewish way, if I may say so. So I was thinking about how I can present this show today and not seem anti-Semitic. So here's my metaphor. Here's what came up to me. Think of me as a Jewish Candace Owens, if you know who Candace Owens is. She's a very wonderful conservative black commentator. And she is indignant at the hijacking of the black community by left-wing radicals making heroes out of thugs and so forth. I don't want to get involved in the controversy itself, but you can look for her. She's got a little 20-minute YouTube clip full of indignation at the black community having made George Floyd into a hero, even though he was a rather unsavory character, according to her. I don't want to be accused of anything, so I'll leave it there. But anyway, so I feel a little bit like a kind of Jewish Candace Owens, that I'm not being critical at all of Judaism, just at the hijacking of Judaism by people who are not representing the heart of Judaism or what's best in Judaism. So anyway, so with that, let me launch in. With the last show, I talked about the Enlightenment or the Endarkenment, this movement that swept across Europe tail end of the 18th century, well into the 19th century, basically with the advent of modern science, with the advent of technology, all of a sudden, man is too advanced to believe in all of these ancient superstitions and legends and myths and to take them seriously. And if we can't reproduce miracles in a laboratory, that means that they don't exist. And we can't take seriously the idea that God wrote the sacred scriptures or inspired those who wrote the sacred scriptures. It's just a bunch of myths and hooey and so forth. And besides which, if you examine carefully these various linguistic qualities, you'll see that it was really written by different people and pasted together and so forth. Modern critical scripture scholarship, which I do not buy into, by the way. I do buy into the dogmatic Catholic view, which is all of sacred scripture, which includes the Jewish scriptures, are inspired by God, although he used human instruments to write them down. So sometimes there's a little filtering through the consciousness of the people who wrote them down and so forth. But the underlying inspiration is always divine. Anyway, But with this kind of, we're too advanced to believe in all that hooey business with the Enlightenment, it really, really undermined, of course, it undermined Catholicism. That was actually the intention. The enemy of the Enlightenment was actually the Catholic Church. It wasn't so much Judaism, I don't think, but the forces behind the Enlightenment, which were essentially Masonic and Satanic, wanted to destroy the Catholic Church and the Catholic faith. And along the way, though, as a side effect, they also kind of destroyed a lot of Judaism, a lot of genuine Jewish faith. And you got, I guess you got a bifurcation, you got a splitting of the road, a kind of fork in the road in Judaism. You still had the Hasidic Jews, the very Orthodox Jews, the very religious Jews, who stuck to their traditional religion and faith in God and love of God. And you then also had the Jews who wanted to take advantage of the Enlightenment, advantage of the emancipation, fit in with other people, not seem different, and certainly not seem gullible and superstitious and so forth. And so they basically were determined to redefine Judaism to fit in with the zeitgeist, with the spirit of the times, with this pseudoscientific, skeptical spirit of the times. And they invented Reform Judaism. I know this has all been a little bit of a recap of the last show. So if I'm not making sense, watch the last show. But anyway, so they invented modern Judaism, let's say, which I will call Reform Judaism for the moment. I know that in a way that's unfair, but it's not as unfair as I wish it were. Basically, the premise was that following the laws of Judaism, taking the Old Testament seriously, keeps us from fitting into society. And in order to fit into society, I mean, the Jewish laws require behavior, which means that we would have to dress differently, that we would have to observe the Sabbath strictly, so we couldn't, have a normal social life or even a normal career life. We have to live in a certain place because we have to be within walking distance of synagogue for the Sabbaths. We can't eat with other people because of the laws of keeping kosher and so forth. We can't touch women because of the laws of ritual purity. So all of these traditional Jewish laws kept them separate. But now the Jewish population, that is, was able to pass as goyim, so to speak, to pass as Gentiles because of the emancipation of the Jews. And they wanted to, and that meant that they had to get rid of the traditional Jewish practices. And then on top of that, you also have the intellectual effect of the Enlightenment, that faith in divine revelation and so forth was all undermined. So basically, you came up with Reform Judaism. That's kind of where I ended up the last show. So I'm going to get off the screen finally. And the founder of Reform Judaism was this man in Germany. He became the chief rabbi of Breslau in 1840. Rabbi Abraham Geiger. And I don't know, I better turn down the volume a little bit. It looks like I'm still distorting. He was determined to make Judaism, quote, compliant with modern times. In other words, fit with modern times, adjust to modern times. And he developed a program to modernize modernize Judaism, replacing the traditional Hebrew liturgy with the vernacular, making the Jewish synagogue services more closely resemble the Protestant services, even making the buildings actually more closely resemble Protestant churches, allowing every individual to decide for him or herself what laws they would follow and what laws they wouldn't follow. So you have cafeteria Judaism, long before you have cafeteria Catholicism, I suppose. Apply modern, quote, higher criticism to the understanding of Scripture. In other words, anything goes, and we all know this is really just a bunch of mishmash of ancient myths, not being very charitable. But that, I warned you at the beginning of the show. Here I am, a kind of white Jewish Candace Owens, I suppose. Anyway, she's more charitable than I am, though. I don't want to insult her. A replacement of Jewish emphasis on ritual observance and worship with social justice. And we'll see that soon in the official credo, so to speak, of Reform Judaism in America, which will be a slide coming up soon. And finally, embracing the customs, mores, and dress of modern culture. So basically, really allowing Jews to just become Unitarians, essentially, just to fit in and get along. I'm saying that as a joke, but actually, when I was growing up, in the Jewish circles in which I lived, Unitarianism was almost just like a more extreme form of Reform Judaism. It's where Jews went if they wanted to fit in even one step more. Anyway, I hung around. Never mind. I have a lot of personal stories I'm going to just skip by. Anyway, so basically, this Reform Judaism, um, I am going to make the assertion that it encompasses probably at least 2/3 of Jews in the United States. And that's not even including atheist Jews, hardcore atheist Jews, I suppose, although agnostic Jews probably do fit in. And the reason for that is because it morphed from just Reform Judaism into Reconstructionism, which then kind of morphed into conservative Judaism. So it kind of spread, maybe like a cancer, maybe not, but it kind of spread like a puddle. And it started with well-defined kind of credo-based Reform Judaism. And then under cover of darkness, it infiltrated more observant forms of Judaism until it kind of took over. And it did that through Reconstructionism, which is going to be my next topic after Reform Judaism. I mean, all today, of course. So I showed you Rabbi Abraham Geiger, who introduced Reform Judaism in Germany in the middle of the 19th century. And it pretty quickly spread to the United States. And well, I'll start with this. I mentioned this last show, but this is the menu from the banquet to celebrate the graduation of the first 4 Reform rabbis from the Reform Jewish Seminary in the United States in 1881, I believe it was. And you can see this is the menu from the Jewish banquet to celebrate the ordination of the new rabbis. And if there are any Jewish viewers out there, I hope will find this as funny as I do, because about, I don't want to say half the menu is very in-your-face, non-kosher, but I've circled this time in a little pink pencil, but the opening course was clams, then we go on to a fish dish of soft-shell crabs, and then we have a first entree of frog's legs, and of course we also have a lot of meat, like beef and poultry and so forth dishes. And so for dessert, we have ice cream, which of course is not kosher if it's mixed with any meat. So that's just my little kind of needling how in your face this early Reform Judaism was about the Jewish laws. They were very embarrassed by that menu, by the way. I think that they got a little blowback for it. But then a couple of years later, the Reform movement in the United States came up with the Pittsburgh platform, which was like an official creed of the Reform movement. And here we go. This is this may be too much text to have tried to put on a single slide. Certainly, if you're watching on your smartphone, it's probably going to make you go blind. But anyway, I'll just read it. I've highlighted some of the more, to me, damning statements. I'll just read through it. It'll certainly give you a picture of where Reform Judaism sprang from. We recognize in every book of Revelation held sacred in any religious system the consciousness of the indwelling of God in man. So we start out there with a, what is the word? Indifferentism is, I think, the Catholic word, that we acknowledge kind of an equal divine revelation in all religions, in every book of Revelation held sacred in any religious system. In other words, we're not saying that there's anything special about the Old Testament compared to the Bhagavad Gita or any other religious text. We hold that Judaism presents the highest conception of the God idea as developed and spiritualized by the Jewish teachers. In other words, Judaism is the highest theology that was developed by Jews. It's not the highest theology developed by man. It's the highest theology developed by Jewish teachers in accordance with the moral and philosophical progress of their respective ages. So it's not only kind of by Jews for Jews, but it's by Jews of a certain century or decade for Jews of a certain century or decade. Okay, going on. We recognize in the Bible the record of the consecration of the Jewish people to its mission as the priest of the one God, and we value it as the most potent instrument of religious and moral instruction. We hold that the Bible reflects the primitive ideas of its own age, at times clothing its conception of divine providence in miraculous narratives. I'm going to get a little controversial. This actually reminds me of some church texts. Maybe the Jews learned it from the Catholics, who knows? That because there is a tendency in modernist church texts, I'm going to put myself back for a moment, to give with one hand and take back with the other. So there'll be one sentence which sounds orthodox and confirming of dogma, and the next sentence will undermine it. It's like an alternating sentences. I'm not going to point to particular documents, but I'm sure some of you know what I'm talking about. And this looks like a Jewish version of the same thing, going back to the slide. So, okay, we revere the Bible, and we recognize that it only reflects primitive ideas of its own age, clothed in the conception of divine providence in miraculous narratives. In other words, in nonsense. These guys, you know, they recognize divine providence, and they made up all these miracle stories in order to clothe, you know, to kind of dress up what they were thinking. Anyway, we recognize the Mosaic legislation as binding only in its moral laws. By the way, they've stopped that because those moral laws include things about fornication and sodomy and so forth. But I guess at the time, they weren't prepared to go that far. I'll show you in a few minutes what I'm talking about. We recognize the Mosaic legislation. By the way, Mosaic means of Moses. It doesn't mean like a mosaic, you know, made up of little pieces of tile. We recognize the legislation of Moses as binding only in its moral laws, but reject all such as are not adapted to the views and habits of modern civilization. See, God doesn't know what he's talking about. Not like the zeitgeist does, not like we know what modern civilization needs. So anyway, obviously this isn't a justification for dismissing any of the laws of kashrut or modesty or anything else. We hold that all such laws as regulate diet, priestly purity, and dress under the influence of ideas entirely foreign to our present mental and spiritual state, which of course is far superior. Their observance in our days is apt rather to obstruct than to further modern spiritual elevation. So you see, those poor benighted Hasids, you know, who are still observing all those laws, they're hurting their own spiritual development. We with our clam chowder rabbinical banquets are contributing far more to our spiritual development than those poor benighted Hasids are. I apologize to Candace Owens for making any comparison, because she doesn't make fun of the misguidedness of her people. She has an air of tragedy around it. I think there's an old line about that, right? I laugh because otherwise I'd be crying. So anyway, back to the slide. We reject as ideas not rooted in Judaism the beliefs both in bodily resurrection and in hell and paradise as abodes for everlasting punishment and reward. Okay, this is really important. They do away with heaven and hell and life after death. Period. I'll talk more about that later in the show. Traditional Judaism, i.e. the Talmud, definitely believes in hell and paradise as abodes for everlasting punishment and reward, although they don't know the details of it like we do as Catholics. the concept of everlasting punishment and everlasting reward is definitely there, but not for the Reformed Jews, because anything supernatural has to be wiped away. Anything with God at its center has to be wiped away, which is why in that pre-open slide, let me just go back to that for a moment to look at it. Judaism without God. That was the subtitle, Judaism without God. It sounds horrible, but I did kind of want to just confront the truth in its horrible nakedness. Anyway, finally, the last paragraph here. We deem it our duty to solve on the basis of justice and righteousness the problems presented by the contrasts and evils of the present organization of society. So that is really the duty and purpose of Judaism, is to solve all of the ills of society and bring in this new utopia. It sounds like Marxism, actually. It's where Marxism actually came from. That's another story. But, just solve all of society's ills, like communism. Everyone will share everything equally. There'll be all peace and justice. No one will be oppressed. No one will take advantage of anyone else. Apparently, we'll be free from original sin and so forth. And the purpose of Judaism is to produce this heaven on earth, because let's face it, when you die, you just rot in the ground and become worm food anyway. So there's no other purpose to anything. Anyway. There you have it. I'm not making this up. I wish that I were. There you have the Pittsburgh Platform, which was the meeting of Reform rabbis in 1885. I may have gotten that year wrong when I just ad-libbed. That laid out the creed of Reform Judaism. Now, let me go on. This is all, by the way, this is not a happy show. That's another reason I'm trying to make a little fun here, because it's not a happy show. Oh boy. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, now it gets worse, and it gets worse with this character Mordecai Kaplan, who I'm going to bring up on the screen while I quickly run, and I note, whoops, that I forgot to light the candle. There I just went, I lit the candle, and I hope that I didn't mess up anything on the broadcast. So let's see. Okay, so that is Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan, the founder of Reconstructionism. Now I have to talk about Reconstructionism. I know that I talked about it a little bit earlier in earlier shows. By the way, I'm sorry, but did you notice how both that picture of Rabbi Geiger here and the picture of Rabbi Kaplan, these are not guys that you really, I don't know how to put it, would want, I don't know how to put it, would want as next door neighbors, would want as troop leaders to, take your kids on a camping trip or something. I mean, I'm not saying anything specific about their moral corruption, just that they look kind of angry and unhappy, bitter. Okay. Reconstructionism. The reason I have to talk about Reconstructionism is because Reconstructionism has taken over non-Orthodox Judaism in the United States. Surreptitiously. I mentioned this before, but the Reconstructionist Seminary in the United States ordains more rabbis every year than any other seminary. And it doesn't send those rabbis into Reform congregations only, or Reconstructionist congregations, but most, I haven't looked at the statistics, but I would say that the plurality of rabbis that go into conservative congregations come from the Reconstructionist Seminary, or a Reconstructionist seminary, because now there are two, which means that these conservative congregations, where the people think that the rabbi believes in God and Judaism, actually don't, but they don't admit it. And I've told this story on an earlier show, but it's true. I'll tell it again. My best friend in high school became a rabbi. His first name was Lewis. I won't mention his last name. And when I started teaching at Harvard Business School, he actually came to visit me for maybe about a week in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I lived, and stayed with me. I was still Jewish. I mean, I was still not Christian. And but I don't know. I guess I was always interested in theology and Judaism, even though I didn't believe in God at the time. That made me fit in, I suppose, with him. Anyway, here this newly ordained Reconstructionist rabbi friend of mine is staying with me, and it took me 3 days to force him to admit that Reconstructionism doesn't believe in God, because he was well trained in talking in circles and avoiding the issue. Finally, I could pin him down, paint him into a corner, so to speak, to the point where he admitted that the Reconstructionist theology says that the existence of God is a moot issue. In other words, maybe he exists, maybe he doesn't, but it's irrelevant. Okay? So anyway, so that's why Reform Judaism would not have taken over, so to speak, or I don't know what to say. Judaism without God wouldn't have taken over if it hadn't been for Reconstructionism. So there you had the picture of Mordecai Kaplan, who was the founder of Reconstructionism. His main book came out, I believe it was in 1930. It was called Judaism as Civilization. And that was basically his premise, that Judaism is a civilizing force for mankind, whether God exists or not. It's a high level of ethical standards, and it moves civilization forward. So it should be respected and preserved and continued, whether or not God exists, because P.S., I don't really think he does exist. That's my little addition. Now, the reason I put up this slide is because of two things. One is the picture on the left, the larger picture, is of the cover of the first edition of his book, Toward a Reconstruction of American Jewish Life. But all of those little pictures to the right are later editions. As a matter of fact, the one I bought maybe in the 1980s is that bright red one. It's been in print ever since. I mean, it is a really, still a bestseller, you could say. It's really, really prominent, and it's really hijacked Judaism. By the way, I hope I have, if I have any Jews watching, or if any Jews, or certainly Jewish converts or Hasidic Jewish converts or whatever, end up watching this show, please put in a comment. Let me know whether you're with me on this, whether you're sympathetic to my portrayal of Reconstructionism as, such a terrible tragedy to befall Judaism. But there's another reason why I put up that slide, which is, you may have noticed, I better put it up again, that on the bottom of the cover of the original edition, there's some small text there. It's pretty hard to read, probably, especially on your smartphone. So I kind of zoomed in on the next slide, and he's putting this in there as a kind of like subtitle to the book almost. I got to read this because this is like really cool to me. The scripture, this is a citation from Psalm 102. This shall be written for the last generation, refers to a people that is moribund. But the concluding words, and a people which shall be created shall praise the Lord, imply that the Holy One, blessed be he, will transform that people into a new being. So here we have Mordecai Kaplan having the chutzpah, that's Yiddish for gall, to suggest that his Reconstructionism is this transformation of Judaism from something moribund to a new being that he's bringing into the world, when we know what this scripture and what this, I believe it's a passage from the Talmud, is actually referring to is in fact Christianity. And the last generation of Judaism, which is moribund, is Judaism before the Messiah came. And the people which shall be created, who shall praise the Lord, that imply that the Holy One, blessed be he, will transform that people into a new being, is of course the transformation in Christ. So I think it is really kind of fun from our perspective to to see just how misguided and also how pseudo-messianic, the kind of would-be messianic Rabbi Kaplan was. He's responsible for a lot of damage to Judaism. The very first bat mitzvah, the bar mitzvah, is when the boy is 13, he enters religious adulthood, he reads from the scriptures in synagogue for the first time. It was only for boys because in traditional Judaism, the responsibilities of males and females are asymmetric. They're very different. And the obligation to liturgical worship is only an obligation for men, not for women. However, Mordecai Kaplan had a 13-year-old daughter or 12-year-old daughter who didn't think it was fair that she couldn't be bar mitzvah just like her brother was bar mitzvah. So he introduced the bat mitzvah for girls. And now, I don't know about Orthodox congregations, but certainly conservative congregations, bat mitzvah girls, which is kind of ironic because the ceremony in the bar mitzvah, which is the introduction, which is this sacramental aspect, so to speak, is reading from the Torah for the first time, reading from the sacred scrolls for the first time. And women aren't allowed to read from the sacred scrolls. But of course, in the bat mitzvah, the 13-year-old girl reads from the sacred scrolls for the first time. So the bat mitzvah, in its essence, is violating actually quite fundamental Jewish law. Anyway, enough bashing. I know, it's not really the end of the bashing, I'm sorry to say. This whole show is about the tragedy. I mean, there are like two big tragedies in my heart about Judaism. The first was missing the boat about the Jewish Messiah, missing Jesus. That's, of course, the biggest tragedy in Judaism. But on top of that, you have, in the last century, Jews even missing what was left of Judaism and turning it into social welfare programs. And this ridiculous deification of their ethnic identity without God in the middle, Judaism without God. I guess there are two tragedies I'm pointing out. First tragedy, Judaism without the Jewish Messiah, Jesus. Second tragedy, Judaism without even the God of the Old Testament, okay? So it's really being piled on. So I'm not anti-Semitic. But yes, this show is about the tragedy, the second tragedy in Judaism. The first tragedy happened 2,000 years ago, and I talked a lot about that. This show is about the second tragedy, which happened in the last 150 years. Okay, on. Okay, so Mordecai Kaplan started Reconstructionism. I have some little quotes of his, lest you think that I'm maligning him unfairly. These are direct quotes from his works. If by the term traditional conception of God we mean the specific facts recorded in the Bible about the way God revealed himself and intervened in the affairs of men, then tradition and the modern ideology are irreconcilable. What happens? Irreconcilable differences, you get a divorce. Okay? Tradition and the modern ideology, which really means the modern zeitgeist, right? The spirit of the times, are irreconcilable. You can actually believe in the conception of God in the Old Testament and the miracles of the Old Testament and the divine providence in the Old Testament. But if you do, I don't know even what this means. You're nuts, basically. It's irreconcilable with the modern ideology, with modern thinking. God is not the conception of the ordering principle in the universe, but of a power predisposing humans to their ultimate human good, provided each person does his or her share learning about and living up to the requisite conditions. To view the cosmos this day is to believe in God. This way is to believe in God. So basically, God is our word for the impulse in the human soul to be moral and to improve the world. And we call that impulse God. And that's what the word God means. And to believe in the existence of that impulse is to believe in God. I think I've just done a pretty good job, actually, of putting in a nutshell the Reconstructionist theology. Let me go on with another quote of my good friend, Mordecai Kaplan. These are all quotes The objective study of history has established the fact that the records of miracles are unreliable. Now, I wish somebody would ask them how the objective study of history has established the fact that records of things written down by hundreds and thousands of eyewitnesses have been determined to be unreliable. Just think of the miracle of Fatima, right? 70,000, 80,000, 100,000 eyewitnesses. Oh, no. But the objective study of history has established the fact that those records are unreliable. Because, of course, since God doesn't exist, there can't be miracles. But he's not filling in that little end. And that the stories about them are merely the product of the popular imagination. The traditional conception of God is challenged by history, anthropology, and psychology. These prove that beliefs similar to those found in the Bible about God arise among all peoples at a certain stage of mental and social development. I mean, I can't help commenting on this. First of all, at a certain stage of mental and social development. In other words, when they're primitive and ignorant and superstitious and not advanced like we are. And history, anthropology, and psychology, you've got two ologies there. This is the deification of science. We have seen this in our day, but with the shutting down of the economy, right? We have to shut down all businesses because 2 million Americans are certain to die of COVID-19, no matter what measures we take, even if we take the full gamut of measures. If we don't, it'll be 20 million. Whoops. Well, it wasn't 2 million. Anyway, but we got that from science. And if you don't believe in that, you're denying science. You're a science denier. And if you don't believe that by the year 2000, snow will be unheard of in North America, you're a science denier. Just look at the global warming predictions from the 1980s. I mean, really, we'd all be underwater by now if those predictions were true. But if you didn't believe in them, you were a science denier. So if you still believe in God, you're a science denier. I'm sorry, but this is basically what Kaplan is saying. Anyway, these sciences, history, anthropology, and psychology, prove that this is just an attribute of primitive mental development. And all peoples pass through a process of evolution, which is entirely conditioned by the development of the other elements in their civilization. So, okay, so we're no longer primitive men. We no longer beat drums and dance around a fire in the middle of our teepees. So we've advanced beyond believing in God or miracles or revelations. I'd like this guy to see the slide I put up last show of the Eucharistic miracle of Poland, right? Anyway, or the electron microscope photographs of the cellular transformation from the bread to the human muscle tissue, right? But we're just, primitives, dancing around our teepees. Anyway, Kaplan quote number 3 in my Jew bashing day. To believe in God. Okay, so he can't sell Reconstructionism by saying there is no God and we don't believe in God. Because he's out of a job as a rabbi, right? Just like my friend Lewis would be out of a job as a rabbi. You can't sell yourself as a rabbi if you say, I don't believe in God. I just think it's neat to be Jewish. So they're doing this in a kind of semi-veiled way, but not very veiled. It's going to get more and more unveiled over time. So this is these slides are from his lifetime. So it's from like the 1930s, 1940s. Although he lived a really long time. He lived in the 1980s. But it's gotten worse. So anyway, back to this last slide of his quotes. To believe in God means to accept life on the assumption that it harbors conditions in the outer world and drives in the human spirit, which together impel man to transcend himself. Okay, so to believe in God means that there's some drive in man to improve himself. That drive in man to improve himself is what we call God. To believe in God means to take for granted that it is man's destiny to rise above the brute and to eliminate all forms of violence and exploitation from human society. So basically, to be a Marxist is to believe in God. To believe in God means being a Marxist, actually, and taking it for granted and eliminating all forms of violence and exploitation from human society, because that's what Marxism was designed to do, right? In brief, God is the power in the cosmos that gives human life the direction that enables the human being to reflect the image of God. So, to some extent, this is just word salad of nice sounding phrases. When it ever says anything that actually has a meaning behind it, it's clear what that meaning is, which is what we call God is this undefined impulse in human psychology to kind of improve things. Okay. Now, the president of the Reconstructionist College of for about 10 years, I'm not looking at the notes because I talked about this before, Rabbi Arthur Greene, a close friend of mine when I was a teenager and in my early 20s. He's taken, he was the president of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. So he was the president of the Kaplan's institution for, ordaining Reconstructionist rabbis. He went a little bit further or took a little bit different tack, and he turned this theology into essentially pantheism, pretty much straight out of Spinoza. And I've played his little 90-second clip, 80-second clip before on the show. So please forgive me for playing it again, but it illustrates that Reconstructionism evolved or devolved or something from atheism to pantheism. Maybe that's a movement forward. So let me play the clip of Rabbi Arthur Greene, the more recent president of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, in explaining to us poor... Actually, he's not explaining to us poor, ignorant, superstitious peasants. He's explaining to his followers, the initiates, of what God is, because of course we believe in God. So here goes. And please forgive me for having so much fun with this.
God is real. It's the center of life. This use of the word God has very little to do with the way most people understand the term, and sometimes you almost feel it should be a different word. But the language of God, of course, is so much a part of our Western tradition especially, that we live with it and we interpret it. The relationship between God and the world is not that of creator and creature, where the creator is out there and the creature is over here. The relationship between God and the world is that between deep structure and surface appearance. Scratch the surface and you'll begin to penetrate the deep structure. You'll begin to see the inner life which is the life of God that animates things and lives within all of reality. Judaism is a toolbox. It's a toolbox. It's a set of tools given to us to uncover that reality. The Jews of past generations, the ultra-Orthodox today will tell you it's God's toolbox. God gave us that toolbox in order to do the work. Some of us may say it's the Jewish people's toolbox. It's the toolbox we inherited from tradition.
Well, you'll have to forgive me. I was unable to monitor that audio clip, so I don't even know, I apologize, whether it ran to the end or whether it actually looped back. And I can't comment on it word for word because I was not able to monitor it. But I do remember that at one point he says, the relationship between God and the world is not between creator and creation, but between deep structure and surface appearance. I do remember that rather memorable quote. And also the incredible arrogance of, it really is. Anyway, I didn't just listen to it, so I can't really talk about it, but I did want to bring it up. And by the way that I nailed down my friend Rabbi Lewis about Reconstructionism, the way that I was able to paint him in a corner was asking him whether there's any purpose to prayer, whether there was anyone listening to prayer and responding to prayer. And that was actually the lever I was able to use to pry open the door to him admitting that there actually is no God at the other end of prayer. Anyway, I lost the ability to monitor the program when I got up to put on the candle. Anyway, the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, I went to their website. So this is their website that's up today, or 2 days ago when I went to it. So this is the home page. Thinking about becoming a rabbi looks like a lot of fun. Look at all those really happy rabbinical candidates. You don't have to try to go blind reading it. I'll put up the text that's underneath in a moment. But for the moment, look at the lower tier of 4 rabbis and the young man wearing glasses with a light mustache and light beard that's kind of in the middle of the bottom row, because we will see him again in another moment. Now, but let me for the moment instead put up the text. Here we have the text that's on that homepage. The college is the sole seminary of the Reconstructionist movement. So I was wrong about there being a second one. Sorry about that. Founded in 1968 to serve the Jewish people, RRC, that's Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, is dedicated to studying and teaching Judaism as an evolving religious civilization. Note, not as a religion, not as a divinely revealed religion, but not even as an evolving religion. They can't even say evolving religion, right? Evolving religious civilization. Judaism is a civilization. It's not a religion. It has nothing to do with God. And to advancing universal freedom, justice, and peace that are Judaism's core values. So there's actually nothing in there that couldn't be said about Bolshevism. And it's about equally successful, excuse me for saying, as Bolshevism would be at advancing universal freedom, justice, and peace. But anyway, okay. Now, okay. So now I told you to pay attention. Well, no, I have to put another one. So, of course, we have to evolve with the times. So, there's this unfortunate, time-dependent prejudice in the Old Testament against same-sex attraction disorder, against actually sodomy and so forth. But on the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College website, they have an entire section of milestones of events in their past that they're particularly proud of. So this is a few of them in chronological order. First milestone, gay lesbian inclusion, because in 1985, which is early for this stuff, it became the first rabbinical school to adopt a policy admitting openly gay students. And there you see a picture of the first openly gay rabbi. Now, I have nothing against gays, and I am not making fun of them for accepting gay students. I am making fun of them for making into rabbis people who are, by Jewish law, the last people who would be permitted to be made rabbis, I guess is the best way to put it. However, having gone to him, let's go to the next milestone. And this is the figure that you saw on that opening screen of their website. Milestone, much more recently, 2009, transgender inclusion. So Jacob Lieberman, my guess is his name used to be Jane. I don't know what his name would have been. Jacob Lieberman, class of 15, becomes the first openly transgender student to enroll in the college. So this young man started life as a young woman, which is probably the explanation for the sparseness of her beard. But anyway, I shouldn't be making fun of this. I'm only making fun of Reconstructionism. I'm not making fun of transgenders or homosexuality. And finally, of course, having homosexual students and transgender students wasn't really enough to show you're really with the zeitgeist, because the 2014 milestone was that the sixth president of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College became the first openly lesbian woman to lead a rabbinical seminary and congregational union, Rabbi Deborah Waxman, PhD, who at least probably started life as a woman and is still a woman. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Oh, please forgive me. Please forgive me. Anyway, enough, because this is not gay bashing at all. It's only Reconstructionism bashing. Okay, so it's time to move on to a happier topic, the Holocaust. I'm sorry. It's not a happier topic. It's a much sadder topic. It's also a sad topic. But I'm actually going to transition now from the destruction done to Judaism by the Reform movement and Reconstructionism to the destruction done to Judaism by the Holocaust. My premise of today's show is that those were the two death knells for mass market Judaism, mass market Jewish theology in the West, probably in the whole world, actually. I'm excluding from this strictly Orthodox Judaism. I talked about that in previous shows. Hasidism. One of the comments asked me, is Hasidism the only form of Orthodox Judaism? No. Hasidism by nature describes the Hasidic sects, the dynasties, the Hasidic families, so to speak, clans. And they come from a particular place and they have particular traditions, and a high percentage of strictly Orthodox Jews do belong to those Hasidic dynasties. But there are many others. And the generic term is Haredi, Hareidi. And, or you can call them ultra-Orthodox, or some of them call themselves modern Orthodox. They are less likely to dress in ways that make them stand out and so forth, but they still consider themselves as adhering to as many of the Jewish laws as they can. So it's not just Hasidic. And I am excluding them from this mockery of the destruction of mainstream Judaism produced by the Reform, then Reconstructionist movement, and the Holocaust. So I'm shifting gears and going to the Holocaust. So I'll try to sober up. And as a matter of fact, there's no way to give sufficient sobriety and reverence to the tragedy of the Holocaust. So I am seriously going to change my mood. Now, if you saw the thumbnail screen for the show, where did I put it? I had to put it here. I had to here. You will have seen this on the right-hand side. Now, this is a very, very moving picture. I think it'll put us in the mood. It's a very interesting picture. It's from, I'm tempted to say, Auschwitz inmate. His number was very low. It was in the hundreds, like 900, maybe it was 1100. He was a very, very, very early prisoner at Auschwitz. He was a Polish Catholic man. And miraculously, he survived the entire life of Auschwitz and actually survived to the end, and I believe was released. And he spent the rest of his life making these very, very beautiful paintings of his time at Auschwitz. And I think he was doing it as a kind of purgation, as a way of getting it out of his system. And there's a collection of them at a religious community outside of Birkenwald, which is one of the Auschwitz camps. And this was a painting he made afterwards, of course, and it's very beautiful because it's very Auschwitz, but you see Christ wearing the crown of thorns, kind of embracing and accompanying the Jewish Auschwitz victim. So it's very beautiful. I don't remember his name. This was just a snapshot I took of the painting in the one of the rooms at the convent outside of Birkenwald. Anyway, it's the only way to process Auschwitz. When I went to Auschwitz, I was very blessed because the first time I went, the bus got lost going there, so we were supposed to get there at like 10 in the morning and have noon mass after visiting Auschwitz, but the bus got lost. So by the time we got there, we were just in time for mass at the Carmelite convent across the street from Auschwitz. So we had a very beautiful mass, and Tridentine, if I can say so. And then we visited Auschwitz. That was my first time there, and the only way I could take it was actually having come straight from mass and having been fortified by Jesus. So very, very profound, this painting of Jesus, in some sense fortifying the prisoners at Auschwitz. Okay, so having made the transition to the effect of the Holocaust, let me go into the effect of the Holocaust on Judaism, because my thesis is that the Holocaust itself was almost like a death blow to Jewish theology, to what was left of Jewish theology, in the first half of the 20th century. So I will start with what I call 3 axioms of Judaism. First, God is all good, all loving, and all powerful. You can recognize these from the Old Testament, I'm sure. Number 2, the Jews are the chosen people, the special favorites of God. That's also right there in the Old Testament. And number 3, reward and punishment come in this life. Now, the fact that reward and punishment come in this life may not be obviously from the Old Testament to Catholics, because Catholics are not all that aware of the difference between the Old Testament and Christianity. So, whoops, what happened? I'll pull up the screen that I want. No worries. So I have a couple of passages from the Old Testament that make it clear that, according to traditional Jewish theology from the Old Testament, reward and punishment are supposed to come in this life. And these are actually verses that follow closely on the Shema, which is the central prayer of Judaism. So they're verses, believe me, that Jews are very familiar with. So this is from Deuteronomy 7. And because you hearken to these ordinances and keep them and do them, the Lord your God will love you, bless you, and multiply you. He will also bless the fruit of your body and the fruit of your ground, your grain and your wine and your oil, the increase of your cattle and the young of your flock in the land which he swore to your fathers to give you. You shall be blessed above all people. There shall not be male or female barren among you or among your cattle, and the Lord will take away from you all sickness. These are clearly rewards for the Jewish people for obeying the commandments, hearkening to these ordinances, as it says, and keeping them and doing them. The reward for just behavior is supposed to come in this life, not in the next life. Similarly, in Leviticus 26, we have this passage. It's almost the same thing. If you will earnestly heed the commandments which I have given you this day, to love the Lord your God and serve him with all your heart and all your soul, then I will favor your land with rain at the proper season, rain in autumn and rain in spring, so that you will have an ample harvest of grain and wine and oil. I will assure grass in the fields for your cattle. You will eat to contentment. Take care lest you be tempted to forsake God and turn to false gods and worship them. For then the wrath of the Lord will be directed against you. He will close up the heavens. There will be no rain. The earth will not yield her produce. You will soon disappear from the good land which the Lord is giving you. So can't be more plain that if you do right by me, you'll be rewarded in this life. And if you do wrong by me, you'll be punished in this life. So what were the Jews to do in the face of the Holocaust? Well, in fact, some of them actually said, and these were basically the ultra-Orthodox Jews, the Hasidic Jews, actually did say it was punishment because of our infidelity to God, because of what I've been describing, the Reform movement, essentially, because of the apostasy from traditional Judaism that characterized the second half of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, especially in Germany, by the way. That was the origin of the Haskalah by the Reform movement. So yeah, the ultra-Orthodox Jews did say maybe the Holocaust was punishment for the Jewish apostasy. But the apostate Jews who had taken that route, in other words, most of the Jews in Germany, were not going to say that. So they were faced with this, the problem of the three axioms. I'll go back to that slide. Okay, God is all good, all loving, all powerful. They could give up on that. That would be one solution. The Jews are the chosen people, special favorites of God. They could give up on that. That would be another solution. Or reward and punishment come in this life. They could give up on that. That would be another solution. Now, they didn't want to give up on number 3, that reward and punishment come in this life, because frankly, that opens the door to Christianity. I know that sounds really silly, but Judaism has made a concerted effort not to ask itself what happens after you die, modern Judaism, because that opens the door to basically missionary activity. You know, what happens after you die? Is there a heaven and a hell? What do you have to do to get to heaven? Let me tell you about Jesus. So Jews have built a wall against considering what happens after you die, because, you know, if you open that door a crack, pretty soon there'll be a missionary with their foot in that door trying to pry it open. And lest you think that I am unjustified in saying this, let me pull up a quote by Elie Wiesel. Now, Elie Wiesel is going to figure big in this broadcast in a few minutes, so I'm not going to tell you who Elie Wiesel is now if you don't know. You'll be sick of him by the end of the broadcast. This is a quote of his from one of his novels. Stop thinking about our salvation, and perhaps the cemeteries won't be so full of Jews. This was said by a Jewish character to a Catholic character. Stop thinking about our salvation, and perhaps the cemeteries won't be so full of Jews. In other words, somehow the issue of the salvation of the Jews results in the persecution of the Jews and the killing of the Jews and so forth. So let's just have none of that consideration of salvation or no salvation or anything having to do with that. So that's just a little bit of an illustration. By the way, you know what? Maybe I'm going to have maybe I'm going to have a little private talk with some of you guys, the ones who listen live, because I'm looking at the chat screen now. Yeah, my mother's escape from the Holocaust was super miraculous, and it does have something to do, I think, with my ministry. So maybe someday I'll have a little not for public consumption discussion of that. Anyway, back to this. Oh, where was I? Okay, so back to the 3 axioms, I guess I should go to. Okay, they don't want to give up on number 3, that about punishment and reward are supposed to come in this life, because that opens up to the issue of salvation. They don't want to give up on number 2, that the Jews are the chosen people, special favorites of God, because where would they be? That's the center of Jewish modern identity, unfortunately. I'm going to close the show with a discussion of that. There is an idolatry which has taken over Judaism. I'll introduce that now, which is turning. Okay, the question is the God of Judaism the God of Judaism, i.e., the God of the Old Testament, the God who appeared to Moses, the God who spoke to Abraham? Or is the God of Judaism Jewish identity and the fact that we are Jews and Jewish ethnic identity? And I will argue that that is an idolatry and that in fact that's an idolatry that has taken over Judaism. Pride in being Jewish, identity as a Jew, is actually, in too many cases, the God of Judaism, rather than the God who's behind Judaism being the God of Judaism. Of course, we know that the God who's behind Judaism is this Jesus fellow with a beard, which is, of course, another problem. But anyway, it's tragic that this idolatry has taken over Judaism. And as long as I'm saying that, I'll just say, as good Catholics, let's make sure we don't make the same mistake and slide into the same idolatry of thinking that being Catholic is in itself basically, I don't know how to put it, but don't make an idol out of being Catholic. I'm always a little bit ambivalent when I see like t-shirts, proud to be Catholic. I was actually uncomfortable when I was invited to speak at a proud to be Catholic event, because it just reminded me too much of a proud to be Jewish event. We shouldn't be proud to be Catholic. We should be humble to be Catholic. We should be humble to be Catholic. We were given this incredible gift of a personal relationship with God like no one else on earth has. And we weren't given it because we're special. Okay? It's an unmerited gift that should make us humble and grateful and eager to share it. So to that extent, I'm not sure what it means to be proud to be Catholic. And the same thing about being Jewish. Being Jewish identity should not be a matter of pride. If it's true that the Jews are the chosen people, then it should similarly be a sense of obligation and a sense of humility. Anyway, enough preaching. So anyway, back to the three axioms. So anyway, the Jews don't want to give up the fact that they're the chosen people. They don't want to give up the fact that reward and punishment have been promised to them in this life. So what do? They give up the premise, the axiom that God is all good, all loving, or all powerful. And you can find really famous, prominent Jews who reflect all three of those first axiom contradictions. That God is not all good, that God is not all loving, or that God is not all powerful. So now I will continue my Jewish celebrity bashing with icons of those three horribly anti-God theologies, either that God is all good, or that he's all loving, or that he's all powerful. So let me start with my hometown rabbi growing up. And someday, if I have a chance for a private talk with you, I will, I will tell you more about my relationship with Rabbi Hertzberg. But Rabbi Arthur Hertzberg, I'll pull up a picture of him. He was my hometown rabbi growing up. So he was my rabbi from when I was, 5 years old and started going to religious education, in some sense, until I went off to college. And I was supposed to marry his daughter. There's no question about that. I was his chosen son-in-law. She was my girlfriend for on and off for over 10 years, probably about 12 years. And, I was his favorite student. He used to call me the genius, sorry. But I was obviously a very good student and had a pious nature. And I was chosen to marry his daughter. And by his daughter, too, she at one point said that if I didn't marry her, she would never marry, but that's okay. So anyway, so now I'm going to go bashing my prospective father-in-law, Rabbi Hertzberg. Okay, he wasn't just famous because he was the father of the woman I was supposed to marry and my hometown rabbi growing up. He was actually probably the most prominent rabbi of the United States, I hate to say, in the second half of the 20th century. He was the president of the American Jewish Policy Foundation. He was the president of the American Jewish Congress. He was the vice president of the World Jewish Congress. He was the chairman of the first delegation to meet formally on the Holocaust with the Vatican. He was, let me get back to my screen that shows me, which, let me pull that up and let me make that a little bit more accessible in the future. Anyway, he was the rabbi who was always invited to the White House to talk about Jewish affairs with President Nixon or President Kennedy or President Carter. He was the rabbi, the American rabbi, who was always called to meetings with Golda Meir when she was the prime minister of Israel about what do American Jews think about this in Israel or that in Israel. And he was the rabbi. I tried for about a half an hour to find a picture. I couldn't find it on the internet anymore. But I, at one time, saw a picture. Remember Assisi in 1986, Pope John Paul II, his interreligious prayer for peace at Assisi. I had a picture of Pope John Paul II leading the procession out of the church at Assisi, and Rabbi Hertzberg at his right-hand side, being like number 2 in the procession. He definitely was at Assisi in 86, but I couldn't find the picture to prove it. Anyway, so he was like this superstar rabbi. Let me find. Oh boy, I'm just blowing everything here. These are some of his books that he published. One modestly called Judaism, which has been in print continually for probably the last 60 years, and so on. I have messed up my sequence of slides. My apologies. Here is a very telling quote of his from his memoirs. Okay. This should make your blood run cold. In his memoirs, he writes, I was aware then, in 1948, he was ordained as an Orthodox rabbi. He's from a family of Chassids, by the way. The Chassids from Belz. A line of famous Hasidic rabbis. And he was ordained, as I said, an Orthodox rabbi. I was aware then, in 1948, that I could never return to the Orthodox faith in God. I would not forgive him for the Holocaust, and I would not absolve him by agreeing that the death camps had existed in a realm that he could not control. Okay? So this is very clear which of the axioms he is choosing. If I can find the axiom slide again. I would not forgive him for the Holocaust, and I would not absolve him by agreeing that the death camps had existed in a realm that he could not control. Okay? He would not forgive him. He is denying that God is all good and all loving because he doesn't want to deny that he's all powerful, because that would be absolving him. Okay? I mean, the chutzpah. The chutzpah. And he was an Orthodox rabbi. Granted, he became the rabbi of a conservative congregation. I guess he believed in God, and he believed that God was all powerful. So that's supposed to be good news. And the only bad news is that God is not good. Okay? I mean, really. Where do you find the, what can you do? I mean, what can you do? You have to laugh, because otherwise you're going to cry, right? So anyway, so that is Rabbi Arthur Hertzberg, my prospective would-be father-in-law, who was not very happy, by the way, when he found out about my conversion. I tell that story, by the way, in some of my witness testimonies. He actually had a kind of almost like an epileptic-looking fit. That's another story. Okay, now let me go on to another one of my little target practice icons of Jewry. Because if Rabbi Hertzberg was the most prominent Jewish rabbi of the second half of the 20th century, there's no question about who was the most prominent Jew of the second half of the 20th century. He's Elie Wiesel. And there is a picture of him. Not a very happy-looking man. But I won't make fun of him. He was a Holocaust survivor. He was actually in the camps as a young boy, I think, early teenager. He's a Nobel laureate. He won the Nobel Prize. The Nobel Committee called him a messenger to mankind. He published 57 books, at least. He founded the Elie Wiesel Foundation for Humanity. He was awarded a Congressional Gold Medal, and he was awarded a Presidential Medal of Freedom. So maybe you can tell me in the chats how many of you have heard of Elie Wiesel, but he is the poster boy for Judaism, actually, second half of the 20th century. He also, of course, was no stranger to the White House, no stranger to the presidents, no stranger to the popes either. Let me pull up some more stuff about Elie Wiesel, and I will get to his theology. So so that is his picture. His accomplishments, some of them I grafted onto that picture, but here are his accomplishments. Nobel Peace Prize, helped establish the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, described as the most important Jew in America by the LA Times, chairman of the Presidential Commission on the Holocaust, led the building of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. I actually put that in there twice, sorry about that. Elected to the American Academy of Arts and Letters, appeared before the UN Security Council, and accompanied those two wonderful icons of the coming of the Antichrist, U.S. President Barack Obama and German Chancellor Angela Merkel, to Buchenwald. So there we have Elie Wiesel. And I like to bring myself back. I don't know if that's right or not, but I feel like I don't want to just be slides for too long. And now let's look at Elie Wiesel's theology, since he is the most important Jew in America. And he was also, by the way, a university professor for most of the second half of his life. I think, oh yeah, he died. I think he did die recently. 2016. But anyway, he was a professor for a long time at Boston University. Officially called BU, but when I was going to college, it was called Jew-U because it was so Jewish. So I'm sure he had a wonderful influence on many of the Jewish students there. Let me show his theology here. Okay, first I'll show his obituary, just to show. This was a speech on the Senate floor when he died. Well, with Elie's passing, we have lost a beacon of humanity and hope, a hero of human rights, and a luminary of Holocaust literature. So let's see where he put God in his pantheon of wonderfulness and in his theology. Okay, first, these are just, I don't want to say random quotes of his. These are all direct quotes from his writings. I believe during the Holocaust, for the very first time in our history, this very covenant, that is the covenant between God and the Jews, was broken. This is why the Holocaust has terrifying theological implications. Okay? God exists, but he's unfaithful. Okay? Sorry. I'm not saying it. Elie Wiesel is. God broke the covenant. And by the way, it's clear from context, he's not talking about the Jews having broken the covenant. God broke the covenant. You'll see this in his later quotes. God broke the covenant. I don't know if he could be all good, but he's certainly not faithful to his promises. There is no Jewish theology. Get that. There's no Jewish theology. There's no Jewish theology. Go to the Jewish theology section of your local library. 80% of the books are going to be on Holocaust history. So by now, probably 20% will be on theology. There's some that's reemerging. Anyway, there's no Jewish theology for a very simple reason. God wants man to be concerned with human things, not with godly things. Jewish theology is human relations. I'm sorry, what do you do with this? Where do you put this? Okay, God exists, but he doesn't want man to be concerned with him. He wants man to be concerned with human relations. Well, I guess we see this even sometimes reflected in the most modernist trends in the Catholic Church, right? Where everything is horizontal. The only thing that matters is horizontal things. Name your favorite representative in the hierarchy of that. Sorry, I won't name names. I'm in enough trouble. Okay, I'm in this for. I'm not in this for Jew bashing, but I shouldn't in the same show be hierarchy bashing. I guess Jewish hierarchy bashing and Catholic hierarchy bashing, or maybe I should. Maybe that makes me ecumenical. I'm sorry. Anyway, oh no, on with Elie Wiesel. Only the Jew knows that he may oppose God as long as he does so in defense of his creation. So I guess we are still the Jew, still the chosen people. The Jews are still the chosen people. We're the chosen people because we have this special privilege of insulting God, of opposing God. That is a privilege that appertains only to the Jewish people because we are so faithful to God. Explain to me exactly why we have this privilege of being the only ones who have the right to diss God to his face. Anyway. However, apparently we do have the right to diss God to his face. On with the Elie Wiesel quotes. Jewish tradition allows man to say anything to God, provided it be on behalf of man. Man's inner liberation is God's justification. I'm going to let you make heads or tails out of it. Certainly, the first part of this confirms what he said elsewhere, that Jewish tradition allows man to say anything to God. We have every right to accuse God of being horrible. There is another quote, which I did not put up because it's spoken by a fictional character in a play of Elie Wiesel's. I think it reflects Elie Wiesel's attitude, but since it's not direct, I didn't put it up there. But it actually says that God likes to molest 11-year-old girls. I'm not kidding you. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be saying that if I don't put it up. It's in my book, Salvation is from the Jews. So if you have a copy of Salvation is from the Jews, you can look in the index for Elie Wiesel and you'll find the footnoted passage where he says that. However, apparently Jewish tradition allows man to say anything to God, including that, provided it be on behalf of man. Man's inner liberation is God's justification. I don't know what that really means. I guess the only, as though, by the way, God has to justify himself, which is a rather bizarre concept. But I guess the reason God can justify himself is because we're allowed to give the finger to God, essentially. Anyway, on to Elie Wiesel quotes. This is the meaning of the Holocaust. It implicated not only Abraham or his son, but their God as well. See, because God was unfaithful. On to another quote. In the endless engagement with God, we, the Jews, proved to him that we were more patient than he, more compassionate too. So not only is God not all good and not all loving, but we're more good and more loving than God. We, the Jews, proved to him that we were better than him. Now, come on, guys. Is this Judaism? Is this Judaism of the Psalms? Is this Judaism of the Old Testament? Is this a Judaism of Jesus? Jesus was a Jew, remember. Is this the love of God that permeates Judaism? Is this even the Judaism of the Hasids, who dance and sing in praise and worship of God, and who actually went singing to the extermination chambers at Auschwitz, singing, "We know that our God lives and that he will redeem us." Singing, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord alone." This is not Judaism. This is anti-Judaism. This is anti-Judaism coming from the mouth and the pen of the most important Jew of the second half of the 20th century in the United States. I got that straight from the LA Times, so it must be true. Right? Okay. I am defending Judaism. I am actually defending real Judaism. I am not bashing Judaism. I am bashing this perversion of Judaism that has infiltrated and polluted what should still be a beautiful, if misguided, worship of God. Okay. I still have to finish in time, so I better move ahead. Okay, so that was that slide, and this may be the last Wiesel slide I have time for. This is a discussion of the story of Job in the Old Testament. And this is Elie Wiesel's theology. He was teaching for decades. Think of the influence he had. Anyway, I was offended by Job's surrender in the text. He should have said to God, "By accepting your inequities, do I not become your accomplice?" See, we're the good guys. God's the bad guy. God's the bad guy because he allows suffering. We're the good guys because, don't ask me why, but we just are. Job did not suffer in vain, though. Thanks to him, we know that it is given to man to transform divine injustice into human justice and compassion. Wow. Okay, so I think that's by far the most blasphemous statement that I have presented on this show. It is given to man to transform divine injustice into human justice and compassion. My conversion came about because I was in agony over life having no meaning. Thank God I now know that life has a meaning. Life has a meaning that's been given to man by God. The meaning that God has given in our lives, that he's filled our lives with, is this high calling to transform divine injustice into human justice and compassion. I don't know whether to laugh or cry. It is given to man to transform divine injustice into human justice and compassion. Now, I don't actually want to send you all out to buy copies of Salvation is from the Jews. I only get about 50 cents a copy from Ignatius Press anyway. The publisher gets all the money. But this is a large chapter in that book because, man, the effect of the Holocaust on Jewish theology. And you can see from these quotes, because I've picked these quotes in order to show the direct linkage between the tragedy of the Holocaust, the three axioms, so to speak, of Jewish traditional theology, and the response of Jewish theology to the Holocaust. So I think probably, oh no, I have one more. Oh, sorry, I have one more Jewish theologian and rabbi that I was going to cover. Elie Wiesel is the most interesting, though, I think, because he's the biggest figure. Now, if I can get a little political here, not that I ever get political, let me bring up this picture of Elie Wiesel. Do you guys remember, I forgot her name, Greta Thunberg or whatever, that Swedish teenager, Thunberg, I think. She was about 15, and she was in the forefront of the global warming business. And at one point, Trump, when he was trolling her, put up a picture of her and said she looks like a very happy young lady because she looked so tortured and unhappy and bitter and angry. So, excuse me, but he doesn't look like a very happy old man. Really, he reminds me of, Trump's troll of Greta Thunberg or whatever her name was. It's like my troll of Elie Wiesel, as this very, happy old man who's found God. No, not. Let's pray for him. I wasn't even aware that he had passed away. I think he passed away, as I said, 4 years ago. So since he's passed away, everybody please. As a matter of fact, I will lead it now, actually. It's the least I can do is Hail Mary for the soul of Elie Wiesel and Rabbi Hertzberg. Artie Greene's still with us, so yes, and Mordecai Kaplan. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. May they find their way, one way or another, to heaven also. I am going to comment on a chat that I just saw. I am not a fan of E. Michael Jones. I think he takes a wrong turn with respect to Judaism. Not that he doesn't say some wonderful things, but I think they're polluted by some not true things he says and not wonderful things he says. So I am not an endorser of his. I acknowledge that he's done some wonderful work, and that in some sense you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, but on the other hand, you don't want to pour the bathwater into the bed with the baby after the bath either. So I would not recommend him without a great deal of discernment. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't recommend him at all. I recommend his early works, but not once he gets focused on Judaism. I'm not here to cast rocks at other traditionalist Catholics. But anyway, I saw that in the chat stream, so I just want to respond to that. Okay, the last of these. If you want Jew bashing, it's much safer to come to me for it. Excuse me. I think I'm more balanced. Anyway, so this is a Jewish theologian. He looks more sympathetic than the others. Rabbi and theologian Richard Rubinstein, who made quite a name for himself with his main book, After Auschwitz. He wrote a lot of other books too, but I think that's the book that made him famous. And he was a very important rabbi also, especially with students. You can see here, he was ordained in 1952. He was ordained, I believe, as an Orthodox rabbi also. He was the assistant director and then director of the B'nai B'rith Hillel Foundation. The Hillel Foundation serves college students. So this is like the Newman Society. It's the Jewish Newman Society. So it means he had a big effect on college students. And he was chaplain to Jewish students at various points in his career, at Harvard University, at Radcliffe, at Wellesley, at University of Pittsburgh, at Carnegie Mellon University, and at Duquesne University. So you can see that he would have had a huge influence on Jewish students. And now some passages from after Auschwitz. Now the reason I'm introducing him is not just to add to my pantheon of anti-Jewish, Jewish theologian rabbis, but because his solution to the three axioms was that God does not exist. There is no God. So here's some quotes from him. God really died at Auschwitz. Nothing in human choice, decision, value, or meaning can any longer have any vertical reference to transcendent standards. We are alone in a silent, unfeeling cosmos. Though most of us will refrain from antisocial behavior, we do so because of fear of ourselves, of others, rather than fear of God. Ultimately, as with all things, it will pass away, for omnipotent nothingness is Lord of all creation. Pretty bleak. Omnipotent nothingness is Lord of all creation. If I believe in God as the omnipotent author of the historical drama, and Israel as his chosen people, I had to accept the conclusion that it was God's will that Hitler committed 6 million Jews to slaughter. I could not possibly believe in such a God, nor could I believe in Israel as the chosen people of God after Auschwitz. So in that issue of the three axioms, he rejects that God exists, and he rejects that the Jews are the chosen people of God. This is contrasted in some perverse sense with Rabbi Hertzberg, who simply rejected God's goodness, not that he exists and not that he's all-powerful. You know, it contrasts with Elie Wiesel. But you can see why I put up that that slide of the three axioms. Let me bring that up for a moment. Is because really, when you look at Judaism in terms of those three axioms, you see the effect of the Holocaust on Jewish theology, and you can directly trace any of the observed theology, so to speak, to resolving the contradiction with one of those three axioms. So I hope that is clear. And so I guess that's enough. That's enough. Good. I can draw to the close of the show in time to make it to Mass. Now, let me end on a little bit of a upbeat note. First of all, some of you in the chat stream have pointed out that this is hardly the theology of the Old Testament or the Psalms. It's the opposite. So here are some short little passages. Isaiah 45. Truly with you God is hidden, the God of Israel the Savior. Those are put to shame and disgrace who vent their anger against him. Before him in shame shall come all who vent their anger against him. I think we've seen some anger vented against him in those last recent slides. Similarly, in Psalm 100, this is the real Judaism, of course. Know that he, the Lord, is God. Go within his gates giving thanks. Enter his courts with songs of praise. Give thanks to him and bless his name. Indeed, how good is the Lord, eternal his merciful love. He is faithful from age to age. And, of course, we know, I hope I have that here. I hope I have that here. Yes, I do have that here. We know what the root problem underlying this confusion is. It's this slide that I like so much. We have the divinely revealed religion of Judaism in the Old Testament, which here is Temple Judaism. Then we have the fork in the road 2,000 years ago we have the transformation of Judaism, Temple Judaism, into completed Judaism, which of course is the Catholic Church. That's the picture on the right. And we have the erroneous fork in the road, which was taken by Jews who rejected Jesus, which is Rabbinic Judaism, which we've been talking about for most of these last 10 episodes, culminating in the anti-Judaism of following the Enlightenment, actually, the anti-Judaism of Reformed Judaism, Reconstructionism, and this post-Holocaust anti-God Jewish theology. And that's really where it came from. And the true resolution of, what's it called, theodicy? Of the existence of suffering in the world in the presence of an all-good, all-loving, all-powerful God requires Christianity. And therefore, I've pulled out this quote from Vatican II. There's no way to understand suffering without Christianity. As it said in Vatican II, Gaudium et Spes, only in the mystery of the incarnate Word does the mystery of man take on light. In fact, Christ, the final Adam, fully reveals man to himself and makes his supreme calling clear. Through Christ and in Christ, the riddles of sorrow and death grow meaningful. And Pope John Paul II, in reference to that passage from Gaudium et Spes, said the following: "These words certainly refer in a very special way to human suffering. Precisely at this point, the revealing of man to himself and making his supreme vocation clear is particularly indispensable." Amen. So that is basically the paralysis that fell upon Judaism from the Holocaust. The fact that they did not have a Christian understanding of the meaning of suffering left them absolutely paralyzed and corralled them into this anti-Judaism. It really is anti-Judaism. It's almost worse than Judaism without God. It's either Judaism without God or Judaism with God as being the evil enemy. I mean, come on, this is horrible. But you can see where it comes from. I actually hope, I seriously pray that the effect of this episode is not to turn your hearts against the Jews, but to turn your hearts towards the Jews. You know, you guys, I mean, I don't care if you're saints. If you look at St. Maximilian Kolbe, he was born into the Catholic Church. His parents were saints. You know, he grew up to be a saint. If you are a good, faithful Catholic, you know, either you had an extraordinary grace that brought you into the Catholic Church, or you had the undeserved good fortune to be born into the Catholic Church. Don't lord it over and have contempt for people who are not given what you undeservedly were given. It should make you humble. It should make you more determined to spread the wealth. You know, it shouldn't make you proud to be Catholic in the wrong sense. It should make you humble and dedicated to missionary activity because you got it with your mother's milk, or you had an extraordinary grace that brought you into the Catholic Church, okay? We are going to be called to account when we die. I mean, I'll close with this. I said it once before. But think of the parable that Jesus gives of Dives, the rich man, and Lazarus, the beggar, starving outside his door. The rich man is feasting at this banquet table piled high with delicacies every day. And Lazarus is outside his door, dying of starvation, you know, would love nothing more than a crumb from his table. The dogs are licking his wounds. The rich man doesn't give him anything. They both die. Lazarus essentially goes to heaven. He's in the bosom of Abraham, which was heaven before the days of Jesus, before he opened the gates of heaven. So Lazarus is essentially in heaven, and the rich man is in hell. And because he did not give even a crumb from the table to the starving man outside the door. Now, we hear this homily preached. We hear it usually preached in terms of our worldly wealth, but please think of it in terms of our spiritual wealth, because we all know that the Eucharist is the heavenly banquet. We all know that we are Divis, the rich man, at the heavenly banquet whenever we go to Mass, at a table piled high with more than the best delicacies in the world, at the food of heaven, heavenly food. When we receive the Eucharist, we receive the bread of heaven, the food of angels. If we hold it to ourselves, if we don't share it with others, if we don't bring others into what we have, we are, worse than Divis in that parable. Because he condemned Lazarus only to earthly death, physical death. We may be condemning others to spiritual death, to eternal death, okay? You know, we only have 2 jobs in life. Number 1, get to heaven ourselves. Number 2, get as many other people to heaven as possible. Okay, it's very simple. It's very simple. The meaning of life is very simple. So look, I've been Jew bashing. I haven't been Jew bashing. I hope you realize that. But in a way, I've been, contemporary Judaism bashing. The only effect it should have for you is not to have contempt for Jews and Judaism, and God forbid, that horrible phrase, the synagogue of Satan. It should be for you to have compassion on the souls, on the Lazaruses outside the door, okay? And if you can't do anything to evangelize Jews, fine, but nothing stopping you from praying for the conversion of Jews, which is why I have that, by the way, in the comments, prayers for the conversion of Jews. So please have a heart for that. I also got a comment about, it was a video on Islam. It wasn't part of the series, so you may not have seen it, where the person actually said, why bother praying for Muslims, these terrible, benighted worshippers of Satan? You should bother praying for them for the same reason you should bother praying for all of the Lazaruses outside of the door. It's not their fault. They were born in Iraq to a Muslim family and don't know any better, okay? God forbid that their souls should be lost. God created them for the same thing he created us, which is an eternity of bliss in heaven. And if they are, unknowns to themselves, following a religion that is designed by Satan to result in their damnation, that is a reason to have compassion on them and to pray for them that they be saved, not to turn our backs on them, okay? So I don't know where this incredibly misguided non-Catholic theology comes from, that we shouldn't pray for Satanists or Muslims or dyed-in-the-wool Jews who hate Christianity. No, it's all the more reason to pray for them, okay? And if you don't have a heart for praying for them, if I may say so, and I really will close with this, then you are anti-Catholics, like these Jews I've been bashing are anti-Jews. If you don't care about the salvation of every non-Catholic soul, however misguided they are, in whatever demonic or polluted religion they're in, then you are not a true Catholic, okay? I'm sorry for saying that. You don't need this Johnny-come-lately Jew to be telling you you're not a true Catholic. But I have the chutzpah, maybe that comes from being Jewish, to say it, okay? We are Divis, feasting at the heavenly banquet every time we go to Mass. Everyone else who isn't doing that is Lazarus outside of the door, starving to death and in danger not only of starving to death like Lazarus and losing their temporal life, but starving to death spiritually and losing their eternal life. So please, don't make the mistake Divis made. Share the heavenly banquet with them. And with that, it's time for me to go off to the heavenly banquet. I hope you've enjoyed the show. My next show, I intend to be on St. Edelstein and the correct Jewish and Catholic understanding of the Holocaust. No guarantees. Keep your eye on the channel for when and what the next show in the series will be. Thank you for watching. Bye for now. And back to that opening screen and that beautiful, beautiful music by the passionate Jewish convert. Boy, my brain stops working. Mahler. So let me find the closing screen here and bring you back to it. Bye for now.